Okay, so the last little bit about candidates running for congressional seats, just real quickly, the significance or importance of party identification. So most Congress members represent constituencies in which their party is the clear majority, meaning that if people who live in a particular district, if the majority of those people are Republican, there's probably going to be a Republican representative who is elected from that district. A clearer example probably is oftentimes California. A lot of people will claim that our state is very left-leaning, very, very radical, might even be thrown out there, has the tendency to vote Democratic. But it's interesting because if we break it down district by district, and there are actually 53 different districts in the state of California, we have some of the most conservative, some of the most right-leaning districts in the entire country. And they tend to be neighboring districts that are the opposite. Case in point, districts within Orange County, Silicon Valley, they tend to be neighbors of districts that are of the different political party. And so, like across the street from each other, we could have a Republican representative and a liberal Democratic representative, literally who are divided simply by one street. And so most people identify with a party and they reliably vote for their party's candidate. Basically what this means is most voting constituents are going to get really attached to a label rather than a person. And so no matter who the name is, probably no matter what issues are going on, they tend to vote for whatever political party they themselves are registered with. And then about 90% of voters who identify with a party vote for the House candidate of that same party. So again, Republicans tend to vote for Republican congressmen. Democrats tend to vote for Democratic congressmen. Pretty straightforward. Okay, so how do you defeat an incumbent? We've established that it's very, very difficult, particularly in the House. A good advantage that one might have if challenging an incumbent is if the incumbent gets sort of wrapped up in a scandal or in a corruption story. So, for example, there have been probably sadly numerous representatives who've made headlines for the wrong reason. Larry Craig from Idaho, Anthony Weiner from New York or New Jersey, I can't remember right now. Both of them got caught in sex scandals. And so when someone is kind of wrapped up, or as the slide says, tarnished by a scandal, they're kind of ripe for the picking for a challenger to come and essentially take their votes. Also, redistricting can also help to weaken an incumbent's advantage. So every 10 years, the U.S. government, Census Bureau, conducts a census, easy for me to say, where we count people. And based on where people are living, some states might either gain or lose districts, and that's up to the state legislatures to determine what those new districts will be. And oftentimes, the districts are invisible lines, and so it could carve out a certain group of people who are very Republican or very Democratic. And so redistricting could totally change the political party identification of people living in a certain area. And so if that changed, someone who used to win hands down in a Republican district, if now all the people in that district are registered Democrats, he's going to have, or she is going to have, a tougher time winning. And then the easiest way to defeat an incumbent is if the seat opens. If somebody retires or decides not to run again and there's a vacant seat, I mentioned this earlier, it's really a fair competition, it's head-to-head, and that's when we see the most turnover, is when an incumbent steps down and vacates the seat. So there's good and bad with having such a high retention rate. So incumbents provide stability in Congress. The House of Representatives have 2-year terms, and so that time goes really quickly, which effectively could mean that every 2 years there's 435 different people sitting in the House, which could create a little bit of chaos. But because you have such a high re-election rate, we do see a lot of stability. Changing Congress occurs less frequently through elections because, again, the re-election rate success rate is so high. Representatives tend to, or hopefully, gain expertise through their experience of serving in the House, and because of this expertise, it's able to kind of build a foundation or lay a foundation for Congress, and because of the lack of turnover, they can kind of just build off of what was being accomplished the session before. And then incumbents often are insulated from political change, meaning that a lot of people, right now is a great time, a lot of people are frustrated with Congress and they say just kick them all out. But actually doing that is a lot more difficult than just kind of spouting out the mouth about it. And so because of this, we don't have to worry too much about changing drastically from one political ideal to the next, because it's pretty stable and there's not a lot of turnover. Interestingly enough, Congress does not have term limits. The reason why I say interesting is because Congress, after FDR, established that the president should have term limits. However, Congress, who needs to propose amendments, has not opted to propose term limits for itself. Part of this might be because it would be difficult to create or maintain stability if we see constant turnover, but there currently is no term limit. So some senators in particular have been in the Senate for a long time. Robert Byrd retired a few years ago. When he retired, was the standing president pro tempore of the Senate, and he had been in the Senate seat since the 50s. So think about how many presidents he had worked with. Think about how many people he had shared the Senate chamber with. Just pretty crazy. All right, so what does Congress look like? If you don't know by now that we have a bicameral legislature, shame on you. We have a legislature divided into two houses, and each state gets 2 senators. You might remember that from the New Jersey plan. And then each state has at least 1 representative. The number of representatives per state depends on the population of the state. And every 10 years, the results of the census could shift representation, but minimally, every single state will always have 1 representative. That would require a constitutional amendment to change that, and that is not foreseeable. So the lovely state of North Dakota will always have at least 1 representative. Even if 3 people are living there, all 3 of those people will be gainfully employed by the government. 2 of them will be senators, and 1 of them will be representative. Interestingly, Congress and all state legislatures, so even at the state level, have chosen to use a bicameral legislature, so 2 chambers. The one exception is Nebraska, and we are going to come back to that when we get into the electoral college process, because Nebraska uses a different method for allocating electoral votes than all other states except Maine. Okay, so just to give you some examples, these states up here, you will see this number 3 for electoral votes equals the number of senators and representatives from that state. So because the number of senators per state is fixed, it's 2, you basically can then look at the number of electoral votes per state and figure out how many representatives, even without knowing anything else about the state. So for example, Wisconsin, it sounds cold there. They have 2 senators, and now you know that they have 8 representatives. My brother lived right here in Kentucky. He has 6 representatives in the Bluegrass State. Florida's hot and humid. There's a lot of retired people there. They have 27 representatives. And yes, we over here on the West Coast are winning. We are the largest state by population, and we actually have 53 representatives. You might remember earlier that I said that we have 53 districts. That's no coincidence. Yes, representatives are elected from districts, whereas senators are elected from the state. Okay, so let's compare, and hopefully this is very clear, let's compare some differences between the 2 chambers. So in the House, any revenue bill needs to begin, originate, or be initiated in the House. The best example, taxes. The reason why all revenue bills need to start in the House is because the House is considered to be the people who are closest to the people, and they obviously have more, so if it passes by a majority, then that is more representative than if 51 senators were to say, yes, let's raise taxes. The House has the power to impeach, and this is probably a good teaching moment. A lot of people misunderstand the word impeach. Impeach simply means to accuse a federal official of an offense. It does not mean to remove from office. It simply is a formal accusation of a federal official. and the House has the power to impeach someone. There are 435 members. We know this. We know they serve 2-year terms. Because they are guaranteed their spot for such a short period of time, we see more specialized, stronger leadership. Because we have so many people, because they're there for a short time, there needs to be sort of a tighter ship run. And then there is limited floor debate over bills, which is very important. And it's very specific. So, for example, there are 30 minutes given to proponents of a bill, and there are 30 minutes given to opponents of a bill. And as soon as that 60 minutes is up, it is time to vote. And the Rules Committee in the House is actually who or what decides what that time limit is. Over in the Senate needs to approve treaties and nominations for cabinet positions or of justices. So the Senate really is one of the main checks on the president's power. And then it is the Senate who actually conducts a trial of someone who has been impeached. So House has the power to impeach, but the Senate actually conducts the trial. Just some little nuggets to keep in your mind. If you guys remember this from history class, we have 2 presidents in history who have been impeached. Neither one of them was Richard Nixon. So I will give you a second to ponder. Yes, that's right. Andrew Johnson, who succeeded Abraham Lincoln, and then Bill Clinton. Both men were impeached. Neither one was removed from office, interestingly enough. So the House voted to impeach both of them, but the Senate did not meet the vote to actually remove either man from office. And also kind of just a little side note about the Clinton impeachment. A lot of people think that Clinton was impeached simply because he had an illicit affair with one of his interns. He was impeached on the grounds that he was accused of lying under oath about some of the shenanigans, we shall say. But it actually was not the act itself. It was the fact that he had lied. And so he was actually impeached for perjury. The Senate has 100 members, 2 from each state. 2 times 50 is 100. They serve for 6 years at a time. So because of this, they have less specialized, weaker leadership because they have more time, they have fewer people. So in theory, they should be able to be a little more autonomous. And then they have unlimited floor debate, which is significant. And we are not talking about that yet, but I will get right back to that. And as I mentioned before, the House Rules Committee is the most powerful committee in the House. And it's the committee in the House that reviews most of the bills, creates the schedule, and then sets the limits for floor debate. And the Rules Committee is responsive to the House leadership, or I guess more closely tied to the leadership in the House, because the Speaker of the House actually appoints the committee's members, and then they vote for the chair. So the Rules Committee is essentially a bunch of the Speaker's cronies, if you will. Okay, I have just enough time, so let's finish this real quickly. So as I mentioned, the Senate does not have a time limit for debates on bills. And so because of this, we have been introduced to a tactic called a filibuster. A filibuster is a strategy unique to the Senate whereby opponents of a piece of legislation use their right to unlimited debate to prevent the Senate from ever voting on a bill. Basically what this means is if there's someone who opposes a bill, he or she has the right to stand up on the Senate floor and talk 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 and basically talk the bill to death, meaning that the senator can talk until the Senate either votes to adjourn or just gets so beat down from boredom and fatigue and being tired that they just decide, okay, we are moving on, we are over this. The most famous filibuster ever was in 1957. A senator from South Carolina named Strom Thurmond adamantly opposed a civil rights bill, and so he used the filibuster, and he actually talked for 24 hours and 18 minutes. So I've been talking for about 14 minutes now, and if you're bored, think about if I still talk to you for one more day. Of course, after 24 hours and 18 minutes, you can only talk about the issue at hand, civil rights, for so long. So Strom Thurmond had his staffers go get phone books and recipe books, and he literally read the white pages to the Senate. He also read his recipes. His favorite was chicken a la king, just little BT dubs. And by the end of his filibuster, they were just so worn down that they adjourned. And so the bill died effectively on the floor. Now, after that, we see a way to stop a filibuster, which is known as cloture, and this is when 60 senators, or 3/5 of the Senate, vote to stop the filibuster.